Hi, my name is Emily Grunewald, and today I'll be talking about the cult of Dionysus for the class of History 101 FO2X, Western Civilization to 1500s for the fall semester of 2022. I thought it would be important to cover why I chose this topic. So, one of my first reasons is that for a long time now, I have been very interested in Greek mythology. I was never able to learn much about it as a kid, so as I got older, I found it very interesting. In my time of reading mythological stories, I learned a lot about gods like Zeus, Hades, Athena, and a few other gods. But I never got to learn much about Dionysus, and I never came across much mention of him either. I was always aware of him being the god of wine, but I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to discover more of his story and learn about who he really is. I also thought the topic title, Cult of Dionysus, was very interesting as I have never learned about how the Greek gods were worshipped, so I thought this would be the perfect time to dive into that and learn about the other cultures' way of worship. As I was studying and researching the cult of Dionysus, the question of, is this real or mythological, came up. From what I have read, the cult of Dionysus is seen mainly in mythological stories, such as the Bacchae, which I will talk about in greater depth later on, but there are real accounts of the cult of Dionysus. There are many pieces of art that depict the religious group and their rituals, and there are some accounts of the cult existing somewhere from around 100 BCE to about the 6th century CE. These groups were often seen celebrating rural agricultural festivals and a large festival in Athens. This was a mystery religion, so there are no detailed accounts of the worship, besides the one confirming their existence and touching lightly on what they did. I believe that before getting into the cult of Dionysus, it's important to know who we are talking about. Dionysus is one of the 12 Olympians on Mount Olympus and is most famously known as the god of wine. Though this is his most recognized title, Dionysus is also known to be a fertility god, as well as a god of vegetation, theater, ecstasy, madness, and abandon. These themes become much more apparent as I get further into who he is and who his followers are. On top of all these things, a real account of Dionysus is apparent. Though a mythological god, it is clear that he was worshipped in ancient Greece, as wine was a very important product. Wine was often used in the home, a source of money for merchants, and it was also used to honor other gods in places of worship, such as temples and altars. Dionysus' background starts with his parents. He is fathered by Zeus, king of the gods, and the mortal Semele, princess of Thebes. His story truly starts when Hera, wife of Zeus, becomes aware of this affair. Hera is struck with jealousy and approaches Semele in order to ignite her revenge. During this confrontation, Hera appears as a trusted friend and convinces Semele to request to see Zeus the same way Hera sees him, as a god. When Semele approaches Zeus to make this request, Zeus ultimately complies as he's unable to turn her down. Zeus appears in his god form of lightning and thunder, which ultimately ends in Semele's demise as no mortal can perceive a god. Through all of this, Semele is pregnant with Zeus's child, who is to be Dionysus. Because of her death, Zeus retrieves Dionysus from her womb and stitches him into his thigh to protect him from Hera. Once Dionysus reaches maturity and is born, Zeus entrusts him to Hermes. Dionysus is turned into a ram and brought to Mount Nysa, where he lives out his childhood in the caves, being brought up by the nymphs that lived there, who eventually became very important and followed him and his religion. This place is also where he is said to have created the vine and where he learned how to cultivate it. So, what is the cult of Dionysus? The cult of Dionysus refers to the people that followed and worshipped Dionysus. These people participated in rites and rituals, and most of the activities they took part in were things such as drinking, dancing, singing, and other things. In mythological stories, it also talks about these people hunting, looking for Dionysus, and participating in sacrifices. The sacrifices usually depict Dionysus' followers dismembering animals. It is also said that these followers partook in orgies and other sexual acts, but there aren't many accounts affirming this, instead it's a heavily implied theme. The cult of Dionysus is also known to be a mystery religion, meaning that their rituals were secretive to anyone that was not an initiate. Alright, so now that we've mentioned Dionysus' followers, it's important to know who they consisted of. The most notable characters of the cult of Dionysus are the Maenads that join him, who are also known as the Bacchants, meaning the female worshippers of Dionysus. It is also known that the god traveled with a host of Pan, known as the Satyrs, the half-man, half-goat creatures. And lastly, though he's not a true follower of Dionysus, is Pan, the god of shepherds and hunters, who would occasionally accompany Dionysus as he traveled through mountains and forests. Alright, so getting more into the Bacchants. These people are noted as being mortal as well as nymphs. They are known as the drunken followers of Dionysus, who are oftentimes seen engaging in drinking, dancing, and singing. Moreover, Bacchants were typically women, with some rare exception of male worshippers. These Maenads followed Dionysus were depicted as mad and estranged women that abandoned their homes and family to indulge in these ecstatic rituals. This is where Dionysus gets his title of being the god of abandon. Some of these women joined at their own free will, and other times these women were forced into this state of madness as a punishment for renouncing Dionysus. The nymphs that accompanied Dionysus were usually willful participants, and many of them aided in the upbringing of the god, but that isn't to say that there weren't willful mortal participants. The traditional uniform of the Bacchants included wearing a fawn skin secured by a snake as the belt, and they would wear their hair down and flowing with a crown of ivy mixed with other foliage. In the picture on the right here, you can kind of see some of the objects that she's wearing. First of all, you see the fawn skin that's wrapped over her shoulders and crosses over her chest. And then in this picture, it shows her having a snake as a crown, but it is usually meant to be a crown of ivy and foliage. You can also see in one hand she holds an animal as a sacrifice to Dionysus, and in the other hand she holds a staff called a thrice. A thrice is characterized as having a pine cone on the end and the staff being wrapped in ivy. Thrices were used as weapons when the women were in need of it, but it was also used as a tool during rituals in honor of Dionysus by hitting the staff on the ground and spreading the seeds of the pine cone to symbolize growth. You can usually tell in art forms who the Maenads are because they will be carrying the staff. Next are the satyrs. In Greek mythology, satyrs are depicted as having a horse tail and horse ears with the legs of a goat. These creatures were seen as very sexual beings that frequently indulged on wine, seeing as they were traveling with Dionysus. There are many stories that talk of the creatures taking advantage of women, so they're not often seen with mortals. In most cases, the satyrs typically accompanied nymphs instead. On the left here, you can kind of see the suggestive nature of the satyr as he accompanies a Maenad. And so one of the most notable satyrs that accompanied Dionysus was known as Phallus, as he was an important character in the processions that occurred during festivals that honored Dionysus. In coming back to when Hera sent Dionysus into a state of madness, here are some of the places that he came across and what happened there. So first off is Egypt. There's not a lot of information about him in Egypt, besides us knowing that as he traveled, he went around spreading his knowledge of the vine and how to cultivate it. In this time, he was also trying to build his base of followers and teach people the worship of the gods. So, in Egypt, Dionysus was welcomed and accepted by King Proteus, who allowed for the teachings of the vine and welcomed his new religion. After Egypt, Dionysus was not again met with wide open arms. When traveling to Syria, Dionysus once again attempts to spread the cultivation of the vine and his new religion, but he meets Damascus, who openly opposed him and the cultivation of the vine. To punish him, Dionysus subjects him to being flayed alive. This opposition is once again seen in India when Dionysus crosses path with the Indians Marinus and Dariates, causing a war to break out. Dionysus and his followers prevailed and conquered India, where they set up pillars and temples for the gods, including himself. Another important place Dionysus ends up in is Thrace. In Thrace, Dionysus once again speaks about the cultivation of the vine and his new religion to King Lycurgus. King Lycurgus follows suit with those before him and denies Dionysus. On top of this, Lycurgus captures and imprisons Dionysus's female followers, and Dionysus is forced to escape by throwing himself into the ocean. The female followers are later set free, and Dionysus returns, making the lands infertile, and claims that no vine will bear fruit as long as Lycurgus lives. This decree causes Lycurgus's people to revolt against him and kill him in order to save their own crop. All of these travels ultimately lead up to Dionysus's visit to Thebes, the home of his mother. His time in Thebes is explained in detail in Euripides' play, The Bacchae. Thebes is said to be Dionysus' first place of travel after returning from Asia. With Dionysus' return to Thebes, he is met with rumors that the sisters of his mother have spread, saying that the god is not the son of Zeus, and rather that Semele had laid with another man out of wedlock, and lied about Zeus fathering the child to withhold her honor, which ultimately caused her death. These falsities enraged the god, and in turn he sends Semele's sisters, as well as the other women of the city, into a state of madness, leaving them to wander into the mountains and forests and abandon their homes and families. When King Pentheus of Thebes, who is also the cousin of Dionysus, finds out about these women leaving their homes in crazed states, he sends his assistants to recover Dionysus and then throws the god into jail. In turn, the women in their maddened state return to Thebes, destroy the cattle and livestock by dismembering them, and then went on to pillage and destroy the village before returning back to the mountains. Dionysus also makes a fool of Pentheus by taking advantage of his curiosity of this newfound religion and tricks him into dressing in the traditional garb of the Maenads. The god tells him that he will be taken to where the women are in the mountains so he can learn of what this group entails and to retrieve his mother and the other women of the city. Once they reach the mountain, Dionysus reveals Pentheus to the women, who they believe is a lion, and in turn he is brutally dismembered by the Maenads, with his mother leading the attack. After this attack, Agave, Pentheus's mother, returns to Thebes claiming victory over the beasts that terrorized their lands. Agave goes on to boast about killing a lion to her father Cadmus, who tries to bring her back to sanity. As they talk, Cadmus is able to get her to realize what she has done, and she is struck with terror. Because of this heinous act of murdering her son, and previously rejecting Dionysus as a son of Zeus, her and her sisters are banished from Thebes and are left to wander. Cadmus, the grandfather of Dionysus, is also punished as he allowed for the defamation of the god and Semele. The cult of Dionysus is most prevalent in mythology, as seen in the Bacchae, but there are real accounts of this religion existing around 100 BCE and forward, with some accounts being even earlier. What allows for historians and anthropologists to confirm the existence of this religion is the prevalence of art depicting the cult of Dionysus during their religious practices. Things such as statues and vase paintings give us a lot of insight into what this religion entails and how it was produced into real life from the inspiration of mythology. In some of these pictures here, you can even see some of the events that occurred during rituals, which I will get into further. On this slide, we see one of the very first important art pieces associated with the cult of Dionysus, and that is the dancing Maenad statue. The statue is said to have been created around 100 BCE when the first accounts of the cult of Dionysus begins. The statue shows a woman in an intoxicated state and wildly dancing. The arms of the statue are no longer there, but it is said that the original statue, the arms were thrown around to show that she was dancing. As seen with the Maenads, her hair is loose and flowing to exaggerate her ecstatic state, and she is also shown wearing a thin and loose garment that allowed for her to move freely during her worship. Next is a vase painting that shows one of the artifacts that was used in religious practices to worship Dionysus. The painting is of a mask that is often held in temples dedicated to Dionysus and would occasionally be worn during religious ceremonies, or it would be hung up in temples and his followers would come to it and worship him from there. The front-facing view of this Dionysus mask is very important as it perceives a very abrupt face, and gods are not usually depicted in art from this front perspective. The perspective emphasizes the human's inability to avoid the demands of Dionysus and the worship of him due to the madness that he bestows. The next face painting shows one of the rites that Dionysus' followers partook in. This rite is called sparagmus in Greek, which means to tear something apart. In this context, the followers initiated into the cult of Dionysus are tearing apart an animal as a sacrifice to the god, as they are seen as dancing and worshiping around the sacrifice. Sacrifice was a really important part of worshiping Dionysus, and violent dismembering of animals is seen very frequently in texts surrounding the cult of Dionysus. All right. Here we see one of the most important pieces of art from the cult of Dionysus, as it shows us one of the real accounts of Dionysian worship. This art piece shows an account of the rural Dionysium, a festival that is held in Dionysus' honor. This image depicts members of a procession that marks the beginning of the festival as they lift up the statue of the god to leave him in his final place at the theater of Dionysus. So, getting more into rural Dionysia, this was one of the lesser festivals dedicated to the god. Rural Dionysia is described to be a festival held to honor Dionysus as the new growing season is approaching. It is said that there are two types of festivals. One of the festivals was a very simple occasion and lacked a lot of the dramatic shows that the other festival did include. The other festival of rural Dionysia included a procession, sacrifices, dramatic reproduction of playwrights and hymns in honor of Dionysus. The sacrifices held no mention of animals in the rural Dionysia, so it's assumed that the sacrifices were foods such as soup and cake that would act as the sacrificial victims, which would occur after the procession. The dramatic reproductions were also held as a contest for the participants and worshippers. Another part of Dionysiac festivals was the phallic procession. The phallic image was an important theme of Dionysus, as it was meant to recall the god's acceptance and entrance into the city of Athens. The phallic image is in context to when Dionysus was rejected from Athens and he plagued the males of the city with genital disease. The phallic procession is where the importance of the satyr Phallus comes into play, as he is the demigod of the phallic procession and the phallic song that was played for Dionysus. The vase painting here shows a woman carrying a phallic image during the procession, as many worshippers did to pay homage to the god. This procession was also known to promote fertility within the community, as Dionysus was known as fertility god, and it also promoted sexual acts of the worshippers. Right. So the second and greater festival was known as the Great Dionysia. The Great Dionysia reflects a lot of the same rituals that the rural Dionysia has, but these are held to a much greater extent. This festival was held in Athens, which is known as the city of Dionysus, and it lasted over many days, from anywhere to 6 to 8 days. The festival was held in order to celebrate the fruit that was born during the growing season and to thank Dionysus for their success. Though this religion was mainly a female group, due to the social standings between men and women at the time, men were the main participants in these festivals, as respectable women were expected to stay home and tend to it, keeping out of sight of the public. On the first day of the Great Dionysia, a procession similar to that of Royal Dionysia is held. This procession begins from outside the city as worshippers carry the statue of Dionysus into the city limits until they reach the theater of Dionysus. The statue of the god is then placed in the theater of Dionysus as to observe all the plays that are to commence during the festival. And in this slide here, you can see the picture. The picture is of the theater of Dionysus, which still stands today. It's a very large theater, and it would hold almost the entire city as this festival went on. The second day is a day of preparation. This is when it is announced what plays and titles will be performed in honor of Dionysus, as this was one of the largest themes of the festivals. And this day is also to prepare for the grand procession that will commence on day 3. So, day 3 is when the grand procession is held. The grand procession included people of all backgrounds and sexes, meaning that women, foreigners, and children were included in this procession. During the grand procession, worshippers would drink excessively and dance their way through the procession. One of the activities they included is dancing on oiled wineskins, which were bags made of animal skin that would hold wine. You can see this on the picture here as it's a satyr dancing with the wineskin, as most people would dress up as satyrs or maenads during these processions. So during these dances, when one would fall off the wineskin, people would cheer, laugh, and drink more wine. Another event that would happen were drinking contests, which were held based on who could drink the fastest, with the winner being awarded a wineskin. And another event were bull sacrifices, and in some years this would end in hundreds of bulls being sacrificed. And at the end of the day, a feast would be held for everyone to participate in. Day 4 is another day of preparation. Instead of preparing for a procession, though, this day prepared the theater for the large amount of plays and tragedies that would commence in the days coming. The biggest event on this day was the sacrifice of a piglet in the theater of Dionysus. This sacrifice was meant to act as a purification of the theater. This day was also characterized by displays of tribute, citizens' honors, and also the freeing of some slaves, which they called manumission. And now, moving on to days 5 through 7, which is when all the dramas were held. Each of the days were filled with the production of 3 tragedies and a satyr play. These plays were very large events that would fill up the entire theater of Dionysus, and the participants were very involved as they'd wear elaborate costumes, as they would do in the processions as well. For an example of what plays would be shown, there's in the year 431, the 5th day, they performed the plays Euphorion's first play, Sophocles' first play, and Euripides' the Medea. On the 6th day, they had a play, Sophocles' second play, a play from Euripides, and Euphorion's second play. And the last day, the 7th day, they had another play from Euripides, Euphorion's third play, and Sophocles' third play. And then on the last day of the Great Dionysia, day 8, included the performance of comedies. 5 comedies would be produced, each by 5 different playwrights, but by the time the 5th century came around, there were only 3 comedies being produced during these festivals. After these productions, all participants would vote on who they believed had the best performance, and after the votes were counted, this is when they would crown the victors as a large ceremony to mark the ending of the Great Dionysia. And in this picture here, you can see one of the performances that was painted onto a vase from the festival. All right. Now, moving on. These festivals were not frequent, as the Great Dionysia was an annual festival, and the Royal Dionysia would happen periodically, but with sometimes it being as long as 6 years since the previous festival. This brings to question what the cult of Dionysus did every other day of the year, and since this was a mystery religion, practices were typically private and unspoken of by initiates, so it's hard to get a grasp on what these people did besides drinking and partying and orgies. So, historians have kind of come to the conclusion that because this was a female dominated religion, it's kind of safe to believe that this religion was an escape from the oppressive life that women lived during this period. Since many women were expected to marry and keep a household and then to not leave because they weren't accepted in society, this cult allowed a partial freedom from the society's expectations. Some believe this was a way for women to take out their discrepancies and frustration against the male dominated world that they lived in, and that's why they would take in such outrageous activities. So, the cult of Dionysus allowed for women to temporarily take leave from their homes and household responsibilities and participate in these rituals. And some historians say that the women that typically partook in Dionysiac worship were women whose social standing was in flux. Such women included those whose husbands were seeking another wife, newlyweds, new mothers, and older women. But this isn't to say that these were the only women who partook, but they were the majority. Some other times it would be older women who were not yet married, or just young girls also participated. Again, it was mainly just women in general as they were trying to escape from the oppressive life in Greek society. So here are my sources. And thank you guys for watching, and thank you for your time.